After my husband's funeral, my daughter drove me into the middle of the desert and said, "This is where your story ends, Mother." Then she drove away without looking back, leaving me with $50 and not a single drop of water. She thought I would die from the heat, from thirst, from despair. But what she didn't realize was that the biggest mistake of her life was underestimating the very woman who had raised her for 35 years. Thank you for being here with me. Tell me, where are you from and how's your day treating you? I truly read every comment, and I love connecting with each of you. Stay tuned to see how I took down an empire built on lies. And if you're intrigued, please subscribe. Note some details are enhanced for storytelling. Resemblances to actual people or settings are coincidental, but the themes are worth considering. My name is Catherine Reynolds. I'm 62 years old, and 3 hours ago, I buried my husband. 3 hours from now, my daughter will try to end my life in the Mojave Desert. It was a Wednesday in mid-November. The funeral home in downtown San Francisco smelled like lilies and old wood. About 60 people filled the chapel, business associates, neighbors, distant relatives. Soft organ music played through hidden speakers. My husband's casket sat at the front, closed, polished to a mirror shine. I stood beside it, dry-eyed. My daughter, Elizabeth, stood next to me. 35-years-old corporate attorney wearing a black Chanel dress and dabbing her eyes with a handkerchief. Her shoulders shook just enough to look convincing. Her husband, Gregory Barrett, 38, investment banker, stood behind her with his hand on her shoulder, playing the supportive son-in-law. I watched her perform. I'd spent 30 years as a chief financial officer hunting corporate fraud. I knew a liar when I saw one. Elizabeth wasn't grieving. She was acting. I couldn't cry either, but for different reasons. I'd already done my grieving 3 weeks earlier when I found the toxicology report hidden in William's desk. The report that told me my husband didn't simply pass away from a heart attack. Someone had taken him from me, and I was standing right next to her. After the service, after the last guest left, Elizabeth touched my arm. Her fingers felt cold, even through my sleeve. "Mom," she said softly, "let's take a drive, just us. We need to talk about Dad, about everything." Every instinct screamed at me to refuse, but I was exhausted, hollowed out, and maybe part of me wanted to believe my daughter still had a heart. "All right," I said. Gregory brought the black Mercedes around. Elizabeth guided me into the back seat like I was fragile. She slid in beside me. Gregory drove. Nobody spoke. We left San Francisco behind. The Bay Bridge, East Bay suburbs, then Interstate 580, heading east into nothing. The landscape shifted from green hills to brown flatlands to something harsher. 90 minutes passed in complete silence. I kept waiting for Elizabeth to say something to explain why we were driving farther from civilization with every mile. She just stared out the window. When Gregory finally turned onto a dirt road, my stomach dropped. We were in the Mojave Desert, miles from anywhere, surrounded by dust and scrub brush and heat that made the horizon shimmer. He stopped the car in the middle of nowhere. "Get out, Mom," Elizabeth said. Her voice had changed, cold, flat. I climbed out on shaking legs. Gregory reached into my purse and pulled out my phone. He tossed $50 onto the dirt at my feet. "That's generous," he said. Elizabeth stepped close to me. Close enough that I could smell her perfume, the same Dior fragrance I'd given her last birthday. She leaned in and whispered in my ear, "This is where your story ends, Mother." Then she got back into the car. The Mercedes pulled away, tires spitting gravel. I stood there watching the black shape grow smaller and smaller until it disappeared into the heat haze. The sun beat down on my head. My throat was already dry. 62 years old, alone in the Mojave Desert. No phone, no water, no way out. That's when I remembered the inner pocket. I'd sewn it into my jacket lining years ago, a hidden pocket for emergencies. My fingers found the small, hard rectangle of a satellite phone. I pulled it out. The screen flickered to life. One unread message. "Don't call the police, call Daniel. He knows everything." I stared at those words. I hadn't sent this message to myself. I hadn't told anyone I kept this phone. So who sent it? And who the hell was Daniel? 4 hours later, I heard the sound of tires on gravel. I'd been sitting in the shade of a Joshua tree, clutching the satellite phone, staring at that message, "Call Daniel." I didn't know any Daniel. At least I didn't think I did. A dust-covered pickup truck skidded to a stop 10 feet away. The driver jumped out, 30 years old, lean, wearing a white chef's coat, dark hair pulled back in a ponytail. "Aunt Catherine," he said, breathing hard, "thank God." Then I remembered. Daniel Porter, my husband's nephew. His father William's younger brother had passed 8 years ago. Daniel moved to California after the funeral, worked his way through restaurant kitchens. I'd seen him maybe twice. "How did you find me?" I asked. He knelt beside me, checking my face, my arms. "I planted a tracker in your jacket 6 months ago. When I saw you heading east into the desert, I knew. You've been tracking me for 6 months. Not just you." He helped me to my feet. "Elizabeth, Gregory, all of it. I work at your husband's flagship restaurant, just a line cook, invisible. But I've been watching them. I heard things. Meetings in corners, whispered conversations. I knew they were planning something." My throat tightened. "You knew?" "I suspected. I didn't have proof until it was too late." He handed me water. "I'm sorry." I drank half the bottle. "Why didn't you call the police?" "Because we need evidence first," he said. "And because you need someone on the inside." Daniel drove me back to San Francisco and checked me into the Fairmont Hotel under a false name. I spent 2 days recovering, trying to process what had happened. My daughter had left me to die in the desert. My nephew had been tracking a conspiracy for 6 months. On the morning of November 18th, Daniel drove me to the law offices of Shaw and Associates on Montgomery Street. Richard Shaw, the family attorney, 52, silver-haired, met us in the conference room. Elizabeth and Gregory were already seated. Elizabeth's face went pale when she saw me. She recovered quickly, but I'd seen it. Shock. Maybe even fear. Richard cleared his throat. "Let's begin." The will was simple. Elizabeth received 60% of the restaurant holdings and the $15 million mansion in Napa Valley. I received 40% of the business and a $5 million pension fund. Elizabeth smiled, not a polite smile, a wide, satisfied grin. "Poor Mom," she said loud enough for everyone to hear. 40%. That must sting after 30 years of playing CFO. Several people in the room shifted uncomfortably. Gregory smirked. Richard Shaw frowned but said nothing. I kept my face neutral. 30 years hunting corporate fraud had taught me one thing: never show your hand when your opponent thinks they've already won. After the meeting, Richard asked me to stay behind. He pulled a sealed envelope from his desk. "Your husband left this," he said quietly. "He told me to give it to you when you were alone. Very specific about that." My hands shook as I opened it. Inside a small brass key, a handwritten note with a 6-digit code, 4479823, and one sentence in William's handwriting. "The land is still yours, W." I stared at those words. What land? "Mrs. Reynolds." Richard's voice pulled me back. "Are you all right?" Before I could answer, Elizabeth appeared in the doorway. She crossed the room and leaned close, whispering so only I could hear. "You think 40% means something 1 week, Mother. 1 week and you'll have nothing. It's your turn now." She walked out, her heels clicking on the marble floor. I stood there feeling the brass key press into my palm. I didn't know what William had left me. I didn't understand what the land meant, but I knew one thing: my husband had hidden something Elizabeth didn't know about, something that scared him enough to leave me a cryptic message and a key to a safe deposit box. I turned to Richard. "This code, 4479823. What is it?" He glanced at the paper. "That looks like a safe deposit box number and access code. Bank of America, probably. Your husband had one at the Montgomery Street branch." I closed my fist around the key. Tomorrow morning, I would find out what my husband had been hiding and why he'd been so sure the land was still mine. The next morning, Monday, November 19th, I stood in the private viewing room at Bank of America's Montgomery Street branch, holding the brass key William had left me. My hand shook as I turned it in safe deposit box 447. I'd been a chief financial officer for 30 years. I'd uncovered fraud worth millions. I'd testified in federal court without flinching, but I'd never been this terrified of what I might find. The drawer slid open. Inside sat one thick manila folder. I lifted it onto the counter and opened it. 4 items. 4 pieces of evidence that would change everything. First, a toxicology report from an Oakland lab dated 10 days before William passed. The conclusion was clear: his blood showed contamination 8 times higher than normal levels. Someone had been introducing harmful substances into his system for weeks. My hands started shaking. Second, a legal document stamped with a Sacramento attorney's seal. Irrevocable land trust agreement, established 5 years ago. I forced myself to focus, to read it like the CFO I'd been for 3 decades. The structure was brilliant. I owned 100% of the land beneath all 8 restaurants from San Francisco to Carmel. Every square foot. The appraised value $200 million. Elizabeth owned the buildings. Only the buildings. She controlled the restaurant operations, but every structure sat on land that belonged to me. Land she couldn't sell, couldn't leverage, couldn't touch. William had given her the empire. He'd given me the foundation it stood on. Third USB drive labeled security camera footage, September to October. 6 videos, hidden camera angles. I knew what they showed. Proof of what Gregory had done. I slipped it into my jacket pocket. Fourth, a letter in William's handwriting. My dearest Catherine, if you're reading this, I've run out of time. I know what Elizabeth and Gregory are doing. I've known for months. I tried to gather proof, but I'm too weak to fight them alone. The land is yours. It always was. The trust is ironclad. They can't break it. Use it to protect what we built. Do what I couldn't do. Make them answer for this. I love you. I'm so sorry I have to leave you this way. Forever yours, W. I read it 3 times, then I folded it carefully and placed it back in the folder. I didn't cry, not yet. Grief would have to wait. I pulled out my phone and photographed every page, the toxicology report, the trust documents, all of it. I used the computer station in the corner to copy the USB drive to my encrypted cloud storage. Then I sent everything to 2 people, Daniel Porter and Emily Harper, my civil rights attorney, 48 years old, one of the toughest lawyers in San Francisco. If anyone could help me use this evidence, it was Emily. 15 minutes later, I walked out into the November morning. Montgomery Street was packed with commuters, men and women in suits carrying coffee and briefcases. Normal people living normal lives, unaware their world could shatter in an instant. I stood on the sidewalk, folder under my arm, and looked across the street. Elizabeth was there, leaning against her black Mercedes, arms crossed, watching me with a cold smile. She knew I'd come here. She knew about the safe deposit box. But did she know what I'd just found? Did she know her father had spent his final months building a case against her? That he'd protected me in ways she couldn't imagine? That the ground beneath her entire empire now belonged to me? I smiled back at her. Then I turned and walked away. Let her wonder what secrets William had left behind. Let her wonder what evidence I now held. Let her wonder. 2 days after the will reading, my phone buzzed with a text message from Elizabeth. Mom, can we talk? Just the 2 of us. Dinner tomorrow night at the flagship. Let's try to move past this. Please. I stared at the message for a long moment. I knew exactly what this was. A trap. Another attempt to make me disappear. But I also knew I needed Elizabeth to believe she was winning. I needed her to think her mother had given up. I typed back, okay, what time? Her response came immediately, 7 p.m. I'll make a reservation in the private dining room. I showed the text to Daniel. He shook his head. Don't go. I have to, I said. We need to know what they're planning next. On November 22nd, a Wednesday evening, I walked into Reynolds Steakhouse, the flagship restaurant William had opened 30 years ago in downtown San Francisco. The hostess led me to the private dining room on the 2nd floor. Elizabeth was already seated, wearing a black dress and a smile that didn't reach her eyes. Mom, she said, standing to hug me. I'm so glad you came. I sat across from her. What did you want to talk about? She ordered for both of us without asking what I wanted. Seafood bisque to start. I watched the waiter disappear into the kitchen. When the soup arrived, I picked up my spoon. Elizabeth watched me carefully, too carefully. I took 1 small spoonful. Within seconds, my throat started to tighten, just slightly, a tingling sensation, the beginning of an allergic reaction. I have a severe allergy to shellfish. Elizabeth has known this since she was 8 years old. I set down my spoon and took a sip of water. I'm not very hungry, I said calmly. Let's just talk. Elizabeth's smile faltered for just a moment. Then she recovered. Of course, Mom. Whatever you want. We talked for 20 minutes about nothing important. Then I excused myself and left. The following week, Elizabeth texted again. Another dinner invitation. November 29th. This time I came prepared. I wore a button camera hidden in my jacket, the kind corporate investigators use. I took an antihistamine an hour before arriving, and I brought a small plastic container in my purse. Elizabeth ordered shrimp salad for both of us. I ate 3 bites, recording everything with the hidden camera. My throat tightened again. My hands started to itch. I excused myself to the restroom, took another antihistamine, and carefully transferred 2 shrimp from my salad into the plastic container. When I got home, I sealed the container and put it in my refrigerator. The next morning, I sent the sample to a private lab in Oakland, the same one that had tested William's blood. The results came back on December 4th. The shrimp contained contamination levels 15 times higher than would occur naturally. Someone had deliberately introduced concentrated extract into my food. The lab director called me personally. Mrs. Reynolds, whoever prepared this, was trying to trigger a severe reaction, possibly life-threatening. I thanked him and hung up. Then I made a call to the restaurant. I asked to speak with the head chef. Michael Torres had worked at Reynolds Steakhouse for 20 years. He'd been William's right hand in the kitchen since the restaurant opened. 45 years old with a wife and 3 kids. A good man caught in a terrible situation. We met at a coffee shop 2 blocks from the restaurant. Michael looked exhausted. Mrs. Reynolds, he said quietly. I'm so sorry. Tell me what happened, I said. He told me everything. Elizabeth and Gregory had approached him 3 weeks ago. They'd offered him $50,000 to add certain ingredients to my meals. When he refused, Gregory threatened to fire not just Michael, but his entire kitchen staff, 15 people who depended on those jobs, people with families. I didn't want to do it, Michael said, but I have 3 kids in college. My wife just had surgery. I couldn't afford to lose my job. I reached across the table and squeezed his hand. I understand, and I'm not angry with you, but I need your help now. Michael looked up. What do you need? I need you to record everything, I said. Every conversation with Elizabeth, every instruction they give you, every single thing they ask you to do. Can you do that? He nodded slowly. Yes, I can do that. 3 days later, Daniel called me. His voice was barely a whisper. Aunt Catherine, I just overheard Gregory on the phone. The next dinner, they're planning to triple the dosage. They want you in the emergency room. I hung up and sat in silence for a moment. I had 7 days to prepare. On the evening of December 6th, a Wednesday, I walked into the private dining room at Reynolds Steakhouse for the 3rd time. Elizabeth and Gregory were already seated. The room was empty except for us. No witnesses. Exactly what they wanted. Before leaving my hotel room, I'd taken a double dose of antihistamine, enough to suppress most allergic reactions. I'd activated the button camera hidden in my jacket, and I'd sent a text to my personal physician, stand by. May need emergency pickup within the hour. I was ready. Elizabeth smiled as I sat down. Mom, I ordered your favorite, seafood risotto, special recipe. The waiter brought 3 plates. I watched Gregory's face as the food was set in front of me. He couldn't hide his anticipation. I picked up my fork, took 1 bite, then another, then a third. The reaction hit faster this time. My throat started closing. My vision blurred at the edges. But I'd prepared for this. The antihistamine was already working, slowing everything down. I dropped my fork, clutched my throat, made a choking sound. Then I let myself fall forward onto the table. Through half-closed eyes, I saw Elizabeth and Gregory exchange a look. Not panic, not concern. Relief. Elizabeth pulled out her phone slowly, too slowly for someone whose mother was supposedly dying in front of her. She dialed 911. My mother, she's having some kind of attack. Please send an ambulance. Her voice was perfect. Panicked. Terrified. But the button camera in my jacket was recording everything, including the small smile that crossed Gregory's face when he thought I couldn't see. The ambulance arrived 10 minutes later. Paramedics loaded me onto a stretcher. Elizabeth rode with me to the hospital, holding my hand, crying for the cameras in the ambulance bay. I spent 4 hours in the emergency room. The doctors confirmed what I already knew, severe allergic reaction to shellfish. They kept me overnight for observation. 24 hours later, Emily Harper called a press conference. I watched it from my hotel room on every major San Francisco news channel. Emily stood behind a podium at her law office flanked by 2 junior attorneys. She was 48, sharp as a blade, and absolutely ruthless when she needed to be. Good morning. My name is Emily Harper, and I represent Catherine Reynolds. We're here today to present evidence of a systematic attempt to harm Mrs. Reynolds by her own daughter. She played the button camera footage first. The video was crystal clear Elizabeth and Gregory watching me collapse. The small smile on Gregory's face. Elizabeth's slow, calculated call to emergency services. Then Emily presented the lab report showing contamination levels 15 times higher than normal in my food samples from all 3 dinners. Then Michael Torres's sworn affidavit detailing every conversation with Elizabeth and Gregory, every threat, every $50,000 bribe offer. Finally, the audio recording. Michael had been wearing a wire during his last conversation with Gregory. Gregory's voice clear as day. Next dinner, triple it. We need her in the hospital this time. No more half measures. The press conference lasted 30 minutes. By the end, every major outlet in San Francisco was running the story. The San Francisco Department of Public Health shut down the flagship restaurant that afternoon pending investigation. They launched reviews of all 8 locations in the chain. Revenue dropped $500,000 in the first week. 4 days later, December 10th, Elizabeth appeared on a local news channel. She looked polished, composed, and absolutely furious. "My mother is staging all of this," she said calmly. "She's angry about my father's will. She's trying to steal my inheritance. None of this is real." That evening, Richard Shaw called me. "Catherine, they just hired Morrison and Price, the biggest defense firm in California. They're going to fight this with everything they have." I hung up and smiled. They'd just made their first real mistake. Panicking, reacting, showing their hand. And I was just getting started. 5 days after Emily's press conference, a courier delivered a thick legal envelope to my hotel room. Inside, a petition for conservatorship filed by Elizabeth Reynolds Barrett and Gregory Barrett in San Francisco Superior Court. The document was 40 pages long. The core argument was simple and brutal. Catherine Reynolds, age 62, was mentally incompetent due to advanced age and severe grief following her husband's passing. She required a legal guardian to manage her assets and make decisions on her behalf. I read it twice. Then I called Emily. "They're trying to take everything," I said calmly. "Not just the business, my bank accounts, my legal rights, everything." "We'll fight this," Emily said immediately. "What evidence do they have?" I flipped through the petition. Medical reports from 3 doctors. The first report came from Dr. David Miller, a neurologist age 50. His assessment early onset dementia with significant memory impairment. He claimed I couldn't recall basic information about my own life during our consultation. I'd never met Dr. David Miller in my life. The second report was from Dr. Susan Winters, a psychiatrist 48 years old. Her diagnosis, paranoid delusional disorder. She stated I believe my family was conspiring against me, a clear sign of mental instability requiring immediate intervention. I'd never met her either. The third came from Dr. Paul Harrison, my supposed family physician, age 60. He claimed I frequently missed appointments, forgot to take medications, and showed confusion about dates and times. Dr. Harrison had been William's doctor, not mine. I'd seen him exactly once at William's funeral. They fabricated everything, I told Emily. Over the next 3 days, Elizabeth and Gregory launched their isolation campaign. On December 12th, Gregory walked into Wells Fargo with a copy of the conservatorship petition and convinced a junior bank manager to freeze my accounts pending court review. I discovered this when my debit card was declined buying coffee. On December 13th, Elizabeth sent a formal letter to the board of directors at all 8 restaurant locations. The letter stated that Catherine Reynolds was no longer mentally competent to participate in business decisions and should be excluded from all meetings effective immediately. On December 14th, Gregory hired a public relations firm. Within hours, local business blogs were running stories about the tragic mental decline of restaurant heiress Catherine Reynolds. Emily worked fast. She hired a forensic accountant who traced Gregory's financial transactions through 3 layers of shell companies. On November 20th, 2 days after the will reading, Gregory had wired $100,000 to a Delaware LLC registered to David Miller's wife. On November 22nd, he'd sent $75,000 to another Delaware company, owned by Susan Winters' brother. Emily also tracked down Paul Harrison. When she showed up at his office unannounced, he broke down immediately. Gregory had threatened him sign the report or lose his medical license through a fabricated malpractice claim. "I'm sorry," Harrison told Emily, crying. "I have 2 years until retirement. I couldn't risk everything." While Emily gathered evidence of bribery and coercion, I made my own move. I contacted Dr. Helen Foster at Stanford University Medical Center, one of the most respected psychiatrists in California. I asked for a comprehensive cognitive evaluation. Dr. Foster spent 6 hours with me: memory tests, logic puzzles, psychiatric interviews, financial calculations. She tested everything. Her written report was 15 pages long. The conclusion was clear. Patient demonstrates full cognitive competence. Memory function exceeds 95% of her age demographic. No evidence of dementia delusions or impaired judgment. Patient is fully capable of managing complex financial affairs. On December 15th, I sat in Emily's office reading the court notice. Conservatorship hearing, December 19th, 2 p.m., San Francisco Superior Court Department 304. Emily looked at me across her desk. "Catherine, do you think we'll win?" I was quiet for a long moment. Then I said, "They haven't played all their cards yet. They'll try to stop me from getting to that courtroom." "What do you mean?" "They'll try to harm me again," I said. "And this time it'll be worse than shellfish in my risotto." Emily's face went pale. "You think they'll—" "I know they will," I interrupted. "We have 3 days. They're going to do something desperate, something that makes me look unstable, or something that keeps me from showing up at all." I stood and walked to the window overlooking Montgomery Street. "Get ready, Emily. The real fight is about to start." 3 nights later, Monday, December 18th, 11 p.m., I returned to my room at the Fairmont Hotel after a late strategy session with Emily. The moment I opened the door, I smelled it, the sweet chemical smell of sleep medication. I flipped on the lights. On the small table by the window, an open bottle of red wine half empty. Next to it, an orange prescription bottle, Ambien, the label read. The cap was off. Pills were scattered across the table surface. And in the center, a handwritten note on Fairmont stationery. My handwriting, or something close enough to pass at first glance. "I'm so tired, I can't do this anymore. I'm sorry." No signature, just those 11 words. I stood perfectly still for 30 seconds, my hand still on the doorknob. This was it, the attack I'd been expecting, the desperate move. They'd staged a scene to make it look like I'd tried to harm myself, right before the court hearing. Perfect timing to prove I was mentally unstable. I didn't touch anything, didn't move further into the room. I pulled out my phone and called Emily, then Daniel. Both answered within seconds. "They're inside my room," I said quietly. "Don't come up yet. Call a private investigator first. We need photographs and fingerprint analysis before anyone else sees this." Daniel arrived 8 minutes later with a camera and a woman named Sarah Mitchell, a former SFPD detective turned private investigator. She photographed everything from 6 different angles. Then she carefully lifted fingerprints from the wine bottle and pill container using a portable kit. "These aren't yours," she said, examining the prints under a small UV light. "Whoever staged this wore gloves on the note but forgot about the bottles." Emily arrived 10 minutes after that. She stood in the doorway staring at the scene. "They're trying to 5150 you," she said immediately. "Get you committed for psychiatric evaluation. If you're in a hospital tomorrow at 2 p.m., you can't appear in court. The judge grants the conservatorship by default." "I know," I said. At 12:30 a.m., someone knocked hard on the door. Then harder. "San Francisco police, open up." Emily opened the door. 3 officers stood in the hallway, hands on their belts. "We received a call about a woman screaming for help in this room," the lead officer said. He was in his 40s, tired looking. "Someone reported hearing—" He stopped. His eyes went to the table. The wine, the pills, the note. "Ma'am, are you Catherine Reynolds?" he asked me. Yes. Ma'am, we need you to come with us for your own safety. I didn't write that note, I said clearly. Someone broke into my room and staged this scene. I have photographs. I have a private investigator who just lifted fingerprints. Ma'am, I understand you're upset, the officer interrupted gently. But we have protocols. We're going to take you to SF County Psychiatric Hospital for evaluation. Emily stepped forward. Officer, my client is competent. This is clearly a setup. We have evidence. Ma'am, California law allows us to initiate a 72-hour hold if we believe someone is a danger to themselves. Section 5, 1150 of the Welfare and Institutions Code. I'm sorry, but we have to follow protocol. 20 minutes later, I was strapped to a gurney in the back of an ambulance. Emily rode in her car behind us. Daniel followed in his truck. Sarah Mitchell promised to rush the fingerprint analysis to a lab that could process results within hours. Through the small window in the ambulance door, I could see the Fairmont's parking lot as we pulled away. A figure stood in the shadows near the valet station. Black coat, arms crossed. Elizabeth. She stepped into a pool of light for just a moment, long enough for me to see her face. She was smiling. She raised one hand and pointed at her watch. The message was clear. You won't make it to court tomorrow, Mother. My phone buzzed, a text from Emily. Emergency habeas corpus petition filed with Judge Nancy Morrison. She's reviewing now. Hold tight. I checked the time on the ambulance's digital clock, 12:47 a.m. The hearing was at 2 o'clock in the afternoon. We had just over 13 hours to get me out. At 1 o'clock in the morning on Tuesday, December 19th, they locked me inside a windowless isolation room at San Francisco County Psychiatric Hospital. The walls were white. The air smelled of bleach and fear, and a red camera blinked in the corner. A young night shift doctor, maybe 30 years old, exhausted eyes clipboard in hand, stood outside the door and ordered 5 milligrams of Haldol for acute paranoia with recent self-harm behavior. I told him I hadn't tried to harm myself. I told him someone broke into my hotel room, staged a scene, and called the police on me. I told him I had photographs, fingerprints, a lawyer waiting outside. He didn't listen. 2 orderlies held my arms while a nurse pushed the needle into my shoulder. Within 20 minutes, my thoughts began to slow the edges of the room, softening into fog. The hours between 1 and 6 in the morning dissolved into a haze. I remember fluorescent lights humming footsteps in the hallway, a voice asking my name. I couldn't answer. The medication pulled me under, and I drifted. At 7 o'clock, a morning shift nurse unlocked the door. Behind her stood Elizabeth, my daughter dressed in a soft gray sweater, her face arranged into concern. She carried a folder of printed text messages and photos screenshots showing me talking to myself in restaurants, long paranoid emails I'd never written. The nurse looked at the papers, looked at me, slumped on the bed, and nodded sympathetically. Elizabeth leaned close. Her voice was a whisper, just loud enough for me to hear. Mother, you're being held on a 72-hour psychiatric hold. Your conservatorship hearing is at 2 this afternoon. You won't be there. You've already lost. She stayed exactly 5 minutes long enough for the security camera to record a concerned family visit and left. At 9 o'clock, Emily Harper filed an emergency petition with the California Court of Appeals. She wrote 12 pages detailing the fabricated suicide scene, the forged note, the suspicious timing of my detention. She cited unlawful restraint violation of due process and requested an immediate writ of habeas corpus. At 11 o'clock, Judge Nancy Morrison, 58 years old, 20 years on the bench, known for her fierce defense of civil rights, called the hospital directly. She ordered my immediate release, stating that holding me without proper evaluation violated state law. The hospital administrator arrived at my door 30 minutes later, unlocked it, and told me I was free to go. Daniel met me in the lobby at noon. I was still shaky from the Haldol, my thoughts slow and thick, but my mind was clear enough to know we had less than 2 hours. At 12:45, Emily handed me a folder. Inside were 2 forensic reports. The first fingerprints lifted from the wine bottle in my hotel room matched Gregory Barrett, my son-in-law. The second handwriting analysis of the suicide note showed a 93% statistical match to samples of Elizabeth's handwriting taken from old birthday cards and legal documents. The clock on the courthouse wall read 1:50 when we parked. We ran. At 1:58, I pushed open the heavy wooden doors of Department 304 San Francisco Superior Court. My hair was tangled, my clothes wrinkled dark circles under my eyes. Elizabeth sat at the defendant's table beside her attorney, a man in an expensive suit who leaned over and whispered something urgent into her ear. But I was there. I was alive, and I had everything I needed in the folder under my arm. Elizabeth's face went pale. She turned and looked at me, and for the first time in 6 months, I saw fear in her eyes. At 2 o'clock in the afternoon on December 19th, Judge Robert Williams, 62 years old, silver hair, 30 years on the San Francisco Superior Court bench, struck his gavel once. The sound echoed through Department 304, a high-ceilinged courtroom with oak-paneled walls and rows of empty seats in the gallery. I sat at the respondent's table, Emily Harper beside me, Daniel behind us in the first row. Elizabeth sat across the aisle at the petitioner's table, her hands folded, her face calm. Gregory sat 2 seats behind her. "This court is now in session," Judge Williams said, case number FD 24194782, conservatorship petition filed by Elizabeth Reynolds Barrett petitioner against Catherine Reynolds respondent. Counsel for petitioner, you may proceed. Thomas Burke stood. He was 55, gray suit, sharp blue eyes, a partner at Morrison and Associates, one of the largest firms in California. His voice was smooth, practiced, confident. Your Honor, the petitioner seeks appointment as conservator of the person and estate of Catherine Reynolds, age 62, on the grounds that Mrs. Reynolds lacks the capacity to manage her financial affairs or care for herself. The evidence will show that Mrs. Reynolds suffers from cognitive decline, paranoid delusions, and an inability to distinguish reality from fantasy. She believes her own family is conspiring to harm her. She requires protection from others and from herself. He turned toward me, his gaze steady. Mrs. Reynolds is a danger to herself. Last night she attempted self-harm. She needs help. Judge Williams nodded. Call your first witness. Burke called Dr. David Miller to the stand. Miller was 50, neurologist, wire-rimmed glasses, gray suit. He raised his right hand, swore to tell the truth, and sat. Dr. Miller. Burke began, You examined Mrs. Reynolds in October. What did you find? Miller opened a folder. I observed early signs of cognitive decline. Mrs. Reynolds exhibited short-term memory loss difficulty recalling recent events and confusion about dates and appointments. In my professional opinion, she is not competent to manage complex financial assets. I wanted to shout that I'd never met him, but Emily squeezed my hand under the table. Not yet. Burke called Dr. Susan Winters next. Winters was 48, psychiatrist, blonde hair, pulled back, confident posture. Dr. Winters, you evaluated Mrs. Reynolds in November. Your diagnosis, paranoid delusions secondary to grief, Winters said. Mrs. Reynolds believes her daughter and son-in-law are plotting against her. She cannot distinguish between real threats and imagined ones. She requires psychiatric intervention and supervision. Third witness, Dr. Paul Harrison, 60, family physician, tired eyes, white coat. He testified that I frequently missed appointments, forgot to take prescribed medications, and showed signs of temporal disorientation. I had never spoken to any of them. Burke moved to the evidence table. He held up a plastic evidence bag containing a handwritten note, the fake letter from my hotel room. Your Honor, Exhibit A, a note found in Mrs. Reynolds' hotel room on the night of December 18th, expressing intent to harm herself. Exhibit B, photographs of the scene, an open bottle of wine, an uncapped prescription bottle. Exhibit C, the police report documenting Mrs. Reynolds' involuntary psychiatric hold under California Welfare and Institutions Code, Section 5150. He turned to face the judge. Your Honor, the respondent attempted to end her own life last night. She was placed on a 72-hour psychiatric hold. She is not capable of caring for herself. We respectfully request that the court appoint Elizabeth Reynolds Barrett as conservator, effective immediately. Judge Williams looked at me. Mrs. Reynolds, do you have counsel? I stood slowly. My voice was steady, but my hands shook. Yes, Your Honor, but my daughter tried to end my life last night. I wish to represent myself. The courtroom went silent. Judge Williams studied me for a long moment, then struck his gavel. Granted. We'll recess for 15 minutes. Emily leaned close and pressed a USB drive into my palm. Everything is here. Are you ready? I nodded. I'm ready. At 4:15 in the afternoon, the courtroom doors opened again. Judge Williams returned to the bench, struck his gavel once and said, "Mrs. Reynolds, you may proceed." I stood and walked to the witness stand. My hands were steady. My voice was clear. I had spent 30 years as a chief financial officer investigating fraud tracing wire transfers, reading balance sheets in the middle of the night. This was my stage. Your Honor. I began. The 3 doctors who testified this afternoon were paid off. Burke shot to his feet. Objection counsel has no evidence. I held up a folder. I have bank records, Your Honor. Judge Williams leaned forward. I'll allow it. Proceed. I opened the folder and pulled out 3 pages. Exhibit D wire transfer records from Wells Fargo Bank showing a payment of $100,000 from Gregory Barrett to a Delaware limited liability company owned by the wife of Dr. David Miller. Transfer date November 20th. Exhibit E a second transfer of $75,000 to a shell company owned by the brother of Dr. Susan Winters. Transfer date November 22nd. Burke's face went red. Your Honor, this is Exhibit F. I continued louder now. Is an audio recording of Gregory Barrett threatening Dr. Paul Harrison. He told Dr. Harrison to sign a false medical report or lose his license. I pressed play on a small recorder Emily had given me. Gregory's voice filled the courtroom. Sign the report, Paul, or I'll make sure the state medical board hears about your little problem with prescriptions. Judge Williams looked at the 3 doctors sitting in the gallery. Dr. Miller, Dr. Winters, Dr. Harrison, do any of you wish to respond? All 3 remained silent. I turned to the next section. Your Honor, the letter found in my hotel room was not written by me. Exhibit G is a forensic handwriting analysis conducted by Dr. Angela Morrison. I caught myself. Dr. Angela Morrison, a certified forensic document examiner with 20 years of experience. Her report states that the handwriting on the letter matches samples of my daughter Elizabeth's handwriting with 90% certainty and matches my own handwriting with less than 5% certainty. I held up another page. Exhibit H fingerprint analysis of the wine bottle found in my hotel room. The prints belong to Gregory Barrett, not to me. Burke opened his mouth, but nothing came out. Exhibit 1. I said, is security footage from the Fairmont Hotel hallway camera timestamped December 18th? It shows Gregory Barrett entering my room at 10:30 p.m. and leaving at 10:50 p.m., 20 minutes before I returned from dinner with my attorney. Judge Williams studied the screen Emily had set up on the evidence table. The video played Gregory carrying a small bag entering my room, leaving empty-handed. I moved to the final section. Your Honor, I am not mentally incompetent. Exhibit J is a comprehensive cognitive evaluation conducted by Dr. Helen Foster, a clinical psychiatrist at Stanford University Medical Center. Her 15-page report concludes that I am fully competent with cognitive function in the 95th percentile for my age group. I held up a thick binder. Exhibit K financial reports I prepared last week for my 8 restaurant locations. Cash flow analysis, profit and loss statements, revenue forecasts, all accurate, all professional. Judge Williams looked at me. Mrs. Reynolds, what was your third quarter revenue? I didn't hesitate. $13.2 million, Your Honor. Up 8% year over year, down 12% from second quarter, due to the media crisis my daughter orchestrated. Judge Williams nodded slowly. I see. He struck his gavel. This court will issue a ruling at 6 o'clock this evening. We are adjourned. I stepped down from the witness stand. Elizabeth stood, her face pale, her hands shaking. She leaned close as I passed and whispered, "You think you won? You don't know anything, Mother." She turned and walked out of the courtroom. A chill ran through me. She still had another plan. At 6 o'clock in the evening, we returned to the courtroom. Judge Robert Williams sat behind the bench, reading glasses perched on his nose, a single sheet of paper in his hand. The gallery was silent. Elizabeth and Gregory sat at their table, Burke beside them, all 3 staring straight ahead. Judge Williams struck his gavel once. I have reviewed the evidence presented by both parties. After careful consideration, this court finds that the respondent, Catherine Reynolds, is fully competent under California law. The petition for conservatorship is denied. Emily squeezed my hand under the table. Judge Williams continued. Furthermore, this court is referring the matter to the San Francisco District Attorney's Office for investigation into the following falsifying medical evidence witness tampering: unlawful detention and conspiracy to cause harm. The three physicians who testified, Dr. David Miller, Dr. Susan Winters, and Dr. Paul Harrison, are hereby ordered to surrender their medical licenses to the California Medical Board within 48 hours pending a formal inquiry. He looked directly at Elizabeth and Gregory. This case is dismissed. He struck the gavel a final time. Elizabeth stood immediately, her face pale and tight. Gregory followed. They walked out of the courtroom without looking back. Burke gathered his files in silence. Emily turned to me, her eyes bright. "You did it, Catherine. You won." I shook my head. "They won't stop, Emily. They'll escalate." At 7:30 that evening, my phone rang. Daniel. "Catherine," he said, his voice low and urgent. "I just overheard Gregory on the phone in the kitchen. He was talking to someone about a major event next week, something about the gala." I froze. The William Reynolds Memorial Charity Gala scheduled for January 19th, exactly 1 month from today. It was the biggest event of the year for our restaurant chain, 300 guests, including investors, city council members, state senators, food critics, and reporters. The flagship restaurant would host the evening. Elizabeth had insisted on organizing it months ago before William passed. "What did he say?" I asked. "I couldn't hear everything," Daniel said. "But I heard him say, this time there will be no mistakes. She'll disappear completely." A chill ran down my spine. "Daniel, stay close to them. Record everything you can. Be careful." "I will." I hung up and sat on the edge of the hotel bed staring at the city lights outside my window. 300 people. A crowded restaurant. Fire exits, gas lines, electrical wiring, so many ways to cause an incident that would look like an accident. At 8 o'clock, the hotel concierge knocked on my door and handed me a white envelope. No return address, no stamp, hand-delivered. I opened it. Inside was a single sheet of paper with one typed line. "Mother should be careful with fire." No signature. I picked up my phone and dialed a number I hadn't called in 5 years. Marcus Reed, FBI, San Francisco. "Marcus, it's Catherine Reynolds." There was a pause. "Catherine, I thought you retired." "I did, but I need your help." Marcus Reed was 54 years old, a former chief financial officer who had left corporate work to join the FBI's Financial Crimes Unit 15 years ago. We had worked together on 3 fraud cases in the 90s. He was smart, thorough, and relentless. If anyone could unravel Elizabeth and Gregory's scheme in 4 weeks, it was Marcus. "What's going on?" he asked. "My daughter and her husband are planning something. I have evidence of wire fraud, bribery, witness tampering, and conspiracy to cause serious harm. There's going to be a charity gala with 300 people on January 19th. I think they're planning to eliminate me during that event, and I think they're willing to put everyone else at risk to do it." Marcus was silent for a moment. Then he said, "Send me everything you have. I'll open a case file tonight." "Thank you, Marcus." "Catherine, be careful." I hung up and looked at the anonymous letter again. "Mother should be careful with fire." 4 weeks. I had 4 weeks to stop them. The 4 weeks that followed December 20th through January 18th were the most intense of my life. Marcus Reed and I worked around the clock not to protect myself, but to build an airtight federal case. We would dismantle Elizabeth and Gregory's empire in front of 300 witnesses. Marcus opened an official FBI investigation. I delivered everything the USB drive containing hidden camera footage of Gregory tampering with Williams' drinks, the toxicology report showing contamination levels 8 times normal, Michael Torres's sworn audio recordings, the button camera video from my 3 dinners, and the forensic evidence proving the fake letter in my hotel room. Marcus studied the files for 2 days, then called me. "Catherine, this is enough to charge them with conspiracy to cause serious harm, but we need more. We need financial evidence, wire fraud, tax crimes, something that puts this case in federal court and keeps it there." With Marcus's forensic software, I accessed Gregory's laptop remotely. What I found made my hands shake: offshore bank accounts in the Cayman Islands and Switzerland Delaware shell companies with no employees, and wire transfer records showing millions of dollars siphoned from our restaurant chain's accounts over the past 4 years. Marcus obtained a federal search warrant. On January 2nd, FBI agents seized Gregory's financial records from his home office and his bank. By January 3rd, Marcus had confirmation Elizabeth and Gregory had misappropriated more than $12 million. Marcus coordinated with the IRS Criminal Investigation Division. Their forensic accountants traced unreported income, falsified tax returns, and hidden assets. The total nearly $4 million in tax fraud. On January 8th, Daniel called me. "Catherine, I overheard Elizabeth on the phone. She's planning a fire at the restaurant during the gala. She said, 'We'll take care of everything that night.' I understood immediately. They wanted to eliminate me in a fire, destroy the evidence, and collect the insurance payout, $8 million for the flagship location. The perfect ending. Marcus laid out the plan. We let them proceed. We catch them in the act. But we control the situation, undercover agents in the kitchen, fire suppression systems on standby, plainclothes officers in the crowd. You want me to be bait, I said. Yes, I agreed. Michael Torres continued recording every conversation he had with Elizabeth and Gregory in the kitchen. Emily Harper prepared legal documents, the irrevocable land trust showing I owned the land beneath all 8 restaurants, the lease agreements Elizabeth had never honored, and the demand for 3 years of unpaid rent. I contacted the event production company organizing the gala and requested access to the AV system. I'd like to display a memorial video for my husband during my speech, I told them. They agreed immediately. On the evening of January 18th, one day before the gala, Marcus called. Catherine, we intercepted a phone call between Gregory and a man named Tony DeLuca. DeLuca is a fire specialist with a record. They're planning to tamper with the gas line, disable the fire alarms, and trigger an incident at 9 o'clock, right when you're scheduled to speak. My throat tightened. How many people will be in the building? 300 guests plus 50 staff. Marcus, are you absolutely sure we can stop this? There was a pause. Catherine, are you sure you want to go through with it? I closed my eyes. I thought of William, of Daniel, of Michael Torres, and every employee who had trusted me for 30 years. I thought of the 8 restaurants we had built together and the land beneath them that Elizabeth would never take. I'll be there, I said, but you have to promise me no guests get hurt. Marcus exhaled slowly. I promise. I hung up. Tomorrow night it would all end one way or another. If you're still here with me, comment the number 2 so I know you're staying for what comes next. And tell me, if you were me, would you walk into that gala knowing your daughter planned to end your life in front of 300 people? Or would you run? I'd love to hear your answer. Quick note. The next part includes some dramatized elements that may not be entirely real. If that's not for you, feel free to stop here. January 19th, Friday evening, 6 o'clock. When I stepped into the main dining hall of Reynolds Steakhouse, 300 guests had already arrived. Crystal chandeliers glittered overhead, a string quartet played near the stage, and laughter filled the room. No one knew that in 2 hours this building would be engulfed in flames, and I was the target. Elizabeth took the stage at 7:30 dressed in a black evening gown, her voice warm and practiced. Tonight we honor my father's legacy. She said, her eyes sweeping across the crowd of investors, politicians, and reporters. He built this restaurant with his own hands. He believed in family loyalty and second chances. She paused, then looked directly at me. Mom, would you join me on stage? 50 camera flashes went off as I walked to the platform. Elizabeth embraced me in front of everyone, her arms tight around my shoulders. Reporters smiled, guests applauded. She leaned close, her lips at my ear. This is the last time you'll appear, Mother. Goodbye. Then she released me, smiled for the cameras, and returned to her seat. After dinner, Elizabeth approached me near the bar. Her voice was calm, casual. Mom, can we talk privately upstairs in the office? Just you and me. I nodded. Of course. I saw Daniel across the room, dressed in a server's uniform, his eyes locked on mine. Marcus stood near the kitchen entrance wearing a bartender's vest. Both of them followed at a distance as I walked toward the staircase. The office was small mahogany desk leather chairs, a single window overlooking the street. Gregory was already inside, standing near the door. When I entered, he closed it behind me and turned the lock. Elizabeth sat on the edge of the desk, her expression cold and clear. "Do you know what's going to happen tonight, Mother? You're going to perish in a fire. Everyone will think it was a terrible accident." I kept my face still. I activated the hidden recording device inside my bracelet, a small microphone Marcus had given me that morning. He'd assured me it would live stream everything directly to an FBI server. Even if the device was destroyed, the audio would be saved. Gregory stepped forward. "We've tampered with the gas line in the basement. The fire alarm system has been disabled. At 9 o'clock, gas will leak into the kitchen. A single spark from the stove will ignite it. The entire building will be consumed within 15 minutes. You'll be trapped here, and we'll collect $20 million in insurance." I forced myself to speak. "What about the 300 people downstairs?" Elizabeth smiled a thin, sharp smile. "They'll escape through the fire exits, but you won't." Elizabeth stood and walked to the door. Gregory followed. She glanced back at me one last time. "Goodbye, Mother." The door closed. The lock clicked from the outside. I tried the handle. It didn't move. I smelled at first faint chemical unmistakable. Gas. I pressed the Bluetooth earpiece hidden beneath my hair. "Marcus, they've locked me in. The gas is leaking." His voice crackled through the speaker. "Catherine, we're evacuating the guests now. Stay calm. We're coming for you." A piercing siren filled the building, the emergency alarm Marcus had triggered manually. I heard shouting from the floor below, the rush of footsteps, the scrape of chairs. A deafening sound shook the walls, a deep, thunderous roar from the basement. The lights flickered. Heat surged through the floorboards. Smoke began to seep under the door. I pounded on the wood with both fists. "Help me! Someone help me!" Black smoke poured through the crack beneath the door. My eyes burned. My lungs tightened. Marcus's voice crackled in my ear. "Catherine, we're coming. Hold on." The temperature climbed. I dropped to my knees, pulled a damp napkin from my purse, and pressed it over my mouth. My vision blurred. My chest ached. And in that moment, kneeling on the floor of my husband's office, breathing smoke and heat, I thought, maybe my daughter has won after all. I lost consciousness for about 30 seconds. When I came to, Daniel was smashing through the office window with a fire extinguisher, pulling me toward the narrow balcony of the fire escape. Black smoke poured out behind us. Flames roared below. "Hold on to me," Daniel shouted. We climbed down the metal ladder, my hands shaking, my lungs burning. At the bottom, we collapsed onto the grass lawn behind the restaurant. I coughed, violently gasping for air. But I was alive. Fire trucks surrounded the building, their red lights flashing against the night sky. Police had cordoned off the street. 300 guests stood in clusters on the sidewalk, wrapped in blankets, watching the flames. Marcus had ordered the evacuation 5 minutes early before the blast. No one had been seriously hurt. A few people had inhaled smoke, but paramedics were already treating them. The flagship restaurant was 60% destroyed. Estimated damage, $8 million. James Cooper, a 50-year-old fire inspector with the San Francisco Fire Department, stood near the entrance holding a clipboard. He spoke to Marcus, his voice calm and professional. This was an intentionally set fire. The gas line in the basement was tampered with. The fire alarm system was manually disabled. Marcus nodded. We expected that. FBI agents grabbed a man near the side alley. Tony DeLuca, 42 years old, a fire specialist with a criminal record stretching back 15 years. He had been trying to leave the scene when plainclothes officers surrounded him. In the back of the FBI van, Tony confessed immediately. Gregory Barrett hired me, paid me $150,000 in Bitcoin. I was supposed to rig the gas line and disable the alarms. That's all I did. I didn't know anyone was going to be locked inside. Marcus recorded every word. Marcus intercepted a phone call Gregory made from his car. Gregory was calling his insurance company. "Yes, this is Gregory Barrett. I'm calling to report a fire at Reynolds Steakhouse, our flagship location. It appears to be an accident involving the kitchen equipment. I'm requesting an emergency payout of $20 million. Marcus had everything he needed: conspiracy to cause harm, intentional fire insurance fraud. FBI agents stormed the penthouse apartment on Nob Hill where Elizabeth and Gregory lived. Inside, suitcases were packed. 2 plane tickets to the Cayman Islands sat on the kitchen counter. Departure time 11:30 p.m. They were arrested at the private terminal of San Francisco International Airport, escorted out in handcuffs in front of a dozen news cameras. Paramedics brought me to San Francisco General Hospital for evaluation. A doctor examined my lungs, checked my oxygen levels, and confirmed minor smoke inhalation, no serious injuries. Marcus arrived 20 minutes later. He sat in the chair beside my bed, his face tired but calm. "Catherine, we have everything. They'll never see freedom again." "The recording?" I asked, my voice hoarse from the smoke. "We got it," Marcus said. The bracelet live-streamed every word to our server Elizabeth confessing to the fire, Gregory detailing the gas line, all of it. The device was destroyed in the heat, but the audio file was already uploaded. Crystal clear. I reached into my coat pocket and handed him a USB drive. "This contains the financial evidence, $12 million in fraud, $3.8 in tax evasion, and everything else." Marcus took the drive and smiled faintly. "You prepared everything." I had to. From my hospital bed, I looked out the window at the city lights of San Francisco glittering in the distance. My phone rang. "Emily. Catherine, the media knows everything. They're calling you the Phoenix Mother, the woman who rose from the ashes. You won." I hung up and exhaled slowly, but I knew the truth. I hadn't fully won yet. The trial, the final battle, was still ahead. The trial lasted 6 weeks. I sat in the witness gallery every day watching Elizabeth and Gregory sit behind the defendant's table. They no longer wore expensive suits. They wore orange prison jumpsuits, and they no longer dared to look at me. The legal timeline. January 19th, arrested by the FBI. January 21st, arraignment, bail denied. February 3rd, preliminary hearing, sufficient evidence confirmed. February 17th, grand jury indictment, 18 federal charges. April 10th, trial begins. Federal prosecutor Sarah Mitchell, 45 years old, sharp and methodical, from the U.S. Attorney's Office, Northern District of California, presented the case piece by piece. She showed the jury 6 hidden camera videos of Gregory tampering with William's drinks, taken over 2 months in the kitchen of our home. She introduced the toxicology report showing harmful substance levels 8 times above normal in William's system. She played audio recordings of Michael Torres describing how Elizabeth and Gregory coerced him into contaminating my meals with shellfish extract 15 times the safe concentration. She displayed the button camera footage from my 3rd dinner showing Gregory's grin when I struggled to breathe. She presented forensic evidence from the fake letter in my hotel room, Gregory's fingerprints on the wine bottle, Elizabeth's handwriting on the note, and hallway security footage showing Gregory entering my room 20 minutes before I returned. She introduced financial records, $12 million misappropriated through 8 Delaware shell companies and offshore accounts in the Cayman Islands. She showed IRS documents proving $3.8 million in tax fraud. She played the recording I made in the office on the night of the fire. Elizabeth and Gregory confessing their plan to eliminate me, rig the gas line, disable the alarms, and collect $20 million in insurance. She called Fire Inspector James Cooper, who confirmed the fire was intentionally set. She played the wiretap of Gregory calling the insurance company to file a fraudulent claim. I testified for 2 full days. I told the jury everything: the desert, the poisoning, the fake letter, the locked office, the smoke filling my lungs. Daniel testified. Michael Torres testified. Toxicology experts testified. Forensic accountants testified. Tony DeLuca, the Crown witness, testified that Gregory had paid him $150,000 in Bitcoin to cause the fire. Elizabeth's attorney argued that she had been under immense stress, controlled by a domineering mother. Gregory's attorney claimed he was simply following his wife's lead, a victim himself. No witnesses of substance were called. Then on May 14th, Elizabeth took the stand. Her attorney tried to stop her, but she refused. She looked directly at me and said, "I did it because I hated her. She controlled my father his entire life. She deserved to perish." The courtroom fell silent. The judge read the verdict. Guilty on all 18 counts. Elizabeth Reynolds Barrett. First-degree harm resulting in the death of William Reynolds. 3 counts of conspiracy to cause serious harm, intentional fire insurance fraud, wire fraud, and misappropriation of funds. Sentence life in prison without the possibility of parole plus 65 years. Gregory Barrett, similar charges. Sentence life without parole plus 50 years. Dr. David Miller, Dr. Susan Winters, and Dr. Paul Harrison. 10 years each. Medical licenses revoked permanently. Tony DeLuca. 15 years reduced for cooperation. When the judge struck the gavel, I looked directly at Elizabeth. She didn't cry. She just stared at me and said, "You won, but you've lost me forever." I stood and walked out of the courtroom. I didn't cry, because I had lost my daughter a long time ago the day she chose to end her father's life. Today, 1 year later in January, I stood on the land where Reynolds Steakhouse once stood. The old building had been demolished. In its place now rose the William Reynolds Culinary Institute, a training center for young chefs from low-income families tuition-free. After the trial, I reclaimed full control of all 8 restaurants. I activated the irrevocable land trust William had created years ago. Elizabeth owned 60% of the business operations, but I owned 100% of the land beneath them. I sent her attorney a formal demand pay $40 million in unpaid lease arrears or transfer her equity back to me. Elizabeth, serving a life sentence, could not pay. I took back full ownership. I rebranded the company as Williams Legacy Restaurant Group. Daniel became my partner and chief executive officer. Michael Torres became culinary director. Within 8 months, revenue recovered fully. By the end of the year, we had grown 15%. I used $10 million from my retirement fund to build the William Reynolds Culinary Institute. Every year, we accept 50 students and train them for 2 years. No tuition, no fees. We guarantee job placement in our restaurants or with partner establishments across California. The grand opening took place on January 15th, exactly 1 year after the fire. 300 guests attended city council members, state senators, philanthropists, and the families of our first 50 students. I stood on the stage and said, "My husband believed that food was more than nourishment. It was a way to build community, to give people dignity, and to create something that lasts. This institute is his legacy." 1 week after the opening, I drove 4 hours east to the Federal Correctional Institution in Dublin, California. I signed in at the front desk and waited in a small visiting room. A guard brought Elizabeth to the other side of a glass partition. She looked thin. Her hair had grayed prematurely. Her orange jumpsuit hung loose on her shoulders. "Are you well?" I asked. She said nothing. She just stared at me. "I built a culinary institute," I said. "I named it after your father. I think he would be proud." Elizabeth smiled bitterly. "Did you come here to gloat?" I shook my head. "No, I came to say this. I forgive myself for not seeing what you became, for not protecting your father, but I will never forgive you. Never." For the first time, Elizabeth cried. Really cried. Her shoulders shook. Tears ran down her face. I stood and walked to the door. I did not look back. That evening, I sat on the balcony of my new apartment overlooking San Francisco Bay. The city lights glittered in the distance. My phone rang. "Daniel. Catherine, Restaurant 9 just hit record revenue. We've succeeded." I smiled. "That's not success, Daniel. That's survival." I hung up and looked at the framed photograph of William on the table beside me. I whispered, "Darling, I did it. I protected your legacy. I won." My name is Catherine Reynolds. I am 63 years old. This is not a story about a mother betrayed by her daughter. This is a story about a woman who was abandoned in the Mojave Desert, targeted 3 times by her own child, but who used 30 years of experience investigating corporate fraud to build an airtight federal case, send the conspirators to prison, and transform pain into something permanent. Elizabeth once whispered in my ear, "This is where your story ends, Mother." She was wrong. That was where my story truly began. Looking back at my journey, I see a woman who survived betrayal not by luck, but by preparation. For 30 years, I investigated fraud. I never imagined I'd use those skills against my own daughter. This is one of those family drama stories where love and greed collide, and the ones you trust most become strangers. My advice: don't be like me. Don't wait until you're abandoned in a desert to realize someone close to you has changed. Watch for the small signs, the cold glances, the calculated words, the obsession with money over people. In family drama stories like mine, the warning signs were always there. I just refused to see them. The lesson I learned: protect what you build, but protect your heart even more. I saved my husband's legacy, but I lost my daughter forever. No amount of courtroom victories can fill that void. These painful grandma stories, stories of mothers, daughters, and broken trust, remind us that blood doesn't guarantee loyalty. My personal belief: God gave me strength when I had none left. In that locked office, breathing smoke, I prayed not for rescue, but for justice. And He answered. Faith doesn't erase pain, but it carries you through it. If you're living your own grandma stories of family betrayal, remember this: you are stronger than you think. Document everything. Trust your instincts. And never let anyone, family, or not make you doubt your worth. These family drama stories and grandma stories we carry teach us that survival isn't about winning. It's about choosing to rise again. Elizabeth once said, "This is where your story ends." She was wrong. That was where my story truly began. I want to thank you for walking with me to the end of this journey. I'd love to hear your perspective. Please leave a comment and share. What would you do if you found yourself in my situation, caught between love and survival? If my story resonated with you, I hope you'll consider subscribing so you won't miss my future reflections. A gentle note from me. While I've drawn inspiration from real-world themes of betrayal and justice, I've dramatized certain elements for storytelling purposes. If this content isn't your preference, I encourage you to explore other videos that suit your taste better.